Hi, everybody. I'm Adriana Hopkins with ABC 7 News in Prince George's County for PGC MLS this week. PGC MLS CEO Roberta Phillips hosts a virtual town hall tonight at 7 o'clock about the library's strategic framework through 2024. Community members are invited to tour the strategic framework microsite, ask questions, and learn about the future direction of the library during this interactive event. The Old Greenbelt Theater and PGC MLS have teamed up to bring children ages 5 and under a story, a craft, and a short film during Storytime on Screen with Old Greenbelt Theater on the second and fourth Mondays of each month. Author Beth Kander discusses her latest book, Syn and Salvation, part of the original Syn Trilogy, on Tuesday at 7 p.m. In the third and final installment of the original Syn epic, everyone and everything is on the verge of explosion. It's an exciting conclusion that no one saw coming. Join us Wednesday at 7 p.m. for the PGC MLS Open Mic. Hosted by Marissa Michelle, this month's theme is Hope. Michelle is the 2020 Prince George's County Youth Poet Laureate, the recipient of multiple national gold medals for poetry in the 2020 Scholastic Arts and Writing Competition, along with an American Voice nomination in that competition, and the winner of the 2020 Diaz-Madison Poetry Prize. Marissa is editor-in-chief of Quarterly, an arts and writing magazine. Are you learning French and want to practice the language? Connect with the library's French Conversation Club on Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Teenagers and adults are welcome to join the club, whether you are advanced or just starting out. Small businesses and entrepreneurs, you won't want to miss this week's community conversation with the Prince George's County Economic Development Corporation, hosted by PGC MLS CEO Roberta Phillips on Thursday at 4 p.m. Come learn about beneficial county resources to enhance and grow your business. It is not too late to participate in the Wizards Winter Reading Challenge. Complete that challenge to be entered into a raffle by logging all activities on Beanstack, such as reading, watching Wizards games, attending virtual library programs, and staying active. Raffle prizes include a Wizards jersey, a Junior Wizards Camp voucher, a Wizards bobblehead, and so much more. There is so much happening at your local library. Be sure to visit pgcmls.info to find out what the Prince George's County Memorial Library System has to offer you for free.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Prince George's County Memorial Library System's virtual programs. We are broadcasting to you live from Maryland with a very special guest who's coming to us from the Chicagoland area tonight. We're very thrilled to be co-presenting this evening with Loyalty Bookstores, which is our wonderful indie bookstore partner. They are Black woman and LGBTQ plus owned, based in Maryland and DC. Tonight is another one of our fabulous events in our author series. We're very, very pleased to be welcoming Beth Kander, who is the author of Syn and Salvation, which is the third in the original Syn Trilogy. And this is what the first book looks like. Fabulous cover artwork, beautiful editions. Really excited for this chat tonight. So just before we get started, I'm going to introduce our speaker with her bio, and also our co-moderator, who you might recognize, but is coming to us in a different guise tonight. And we have a very special distinction where tonight is the first time we've had an author on who is a co-alumnus of an institution that both Kyle and I attended, which is super exciting. So we're jazzed. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight. We're very excited to introduce Beth's work to you, or have you revisit Beth's work if you're already familiar with her work. So first up, I'm going to introduce Beth Kander, who is appearing on screen right now. Welcome, Beth.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So Beth grew up in small town Midwest and spent more than a decade in the Deep South, always collecting stories. She has an MFA in creative writing from Mississippi University for Women and a Master of Social Work from the University of Michigan. Her novels draw readers into her characters' lives, often exploring haunted pasts, interconnected narratives, or reimagined folklore. She's also an award-winning playwright and has more than a half dozen scripts that have been represented, or that are represented by Stage Rights, and is playwright in residence each fall at the Ashland New Plays Festival. She also has worked with theaters across the country, and as I mentioned before, lives in Chicago with her all-time favorite characters, her quirky little family, which just grew by one more in the last couple months, which is fabulous. Congratulations, Beth, who has
Thank you, Nick.
family. Yeah. So we're so excited to have you. And before we get started, just going to bring up our very dear friend, Kyla Hannington, who is not working for the county tonight, here in her literary maven capacity. Hello, Kyla. Nice to see you. It's been 24 hours. Kyla is a Canadian writer and editor who now lives in Maryland, and her work has appeared in magazines in the United States and Canada, and has also been broadcast internationally on CBC Radio's The Sunday Edition. Kyla is a fellow for the Desert Nights Rising Stars Writers Conference 2021. She's also been a reader for the 2021 Firecracker Awards and has served as a fiction and nonfiction editor at Ponder Review and also a nonfiction editor at Variant Literature. Kyla returned to university began attending university at 35 years old and is a really amazing advocate for returning students and the transformative power of higher education. She received her BA from Vancouver Island University and completed her MFA in creative writing at Mississippi University for Women, hence the connection. And now Kyla, we're going to be co-alums finally, begins an MA in human rights at the University of London 2021. And I also got a degree within the University of London system, which is pretty cool. And Kyla thanks those institutions for their ongoing work, changing individual lives and through them, the world. And one very special thing about Kyla, Kyla is one of those rare, remarkable people who pays it forward at every opportunity she has, which is amazing. And she has recently established a scholarship fund at Vancouver Island University to help other students coming up get their education and pursue their dreams, which is really, really special. And we commend Kyla for that. Thank you, Kyla, for being such a wonderful person and friend. We appreciate you all the time.
Kyla, can we just talk about your journey and your books and your contributions to the world tonight? Because I'm down. Let's just do that.
Well, thank you. That was a very lovely introduction. Thank you, Nick. And I just want to say hi to everybody out there. I know we have some favorites, Miss Vivian, and also I see my dad in Hawaii, and so I just want to say hi. And also lots of friends from Mississippi University for Women. So I want to just acknowledge a really wonderful, loyal viewers and some new viewers with us tonight. And new to me in my non-HRC county role, I'm just here as myself. So hi, everybody. Beth, I know that for a lot of our viewers, not everybody knows your work. And so I'm hoping that if you don't mind, if you could take a few minutes to take us through this amazing trilogy and sort of talk about what's the work? What are we talking about? Let's maybe give people an introduction.
Jump right into Original Syn. So I think the first most important thing I can say, especially to any aspiring writers out there, I wrote this series 10 years ago. The first book was written and the other two were outlined a decade ago. And the final installment just came out in October of this past year. So it's often a very long journey from when you have this great idea for a story, hopefully great, to getting it out there in the world. So it all actually started when I read a Time magazine article and then several more articles about the coming of the singularity, the event when man and machine truly merge, and what ethical implications that might have when the lines truly start to blur between technology and humanity. And obviously, we're all living through a time where the pace of technology is just mind-blowing. And so I really started to get terrified about the idea that this, like anything, is a commodity. And so as we have more and more tech that might extend lives, it's not going to extend everyone's life. It's not going to increase everyone's wealth. And so what happens when in our already stratified world, some people are hoarding resources even more because they're going to be here forever? And then what happens to those who have not? So that was sort of the genesis of Original Syn, which I should say is not in any way a religious story, despite all of the religious puns of the three titles of the books in the series: Original Syn, Born in Syn, and Syn and Salvation. But it is a play on words of the two types of characters in the book. We have the originals, who are people who do not upgrade to be part machine, and the synthetic citizens, or Syns, who are the ones who do, and who are then motivated to take as the originals just try to scrape by and survive. And when we jump into the story, the originals are on their last legs. We might be in the last generation of the originals if nothing changes. So, of course, that's the moment that something's going to change. And that's where we start with Original Syn. And I will say Born in Syn is actually then largely told in flashback. It's a big exploration of how we got to where we are. And then Syn and Salvation throws you back in where original Syn leaves off. So I did have several readers who wrote to me and were like, what? There was this big cliffhanger at the end of the first book, and then I have to spend this whole next book. It's a good thing I enjoyed all the little mini backstories because I was waiting to find out what happened. You do pick right back up in Syn and Salvation with the end of original Syn, and it's sort of on the rails from there. So that's my dystopian trilogy. I think I only have one of those in me. If we talk about next projects later, they're very different. But I grew up reading dystopia and sci-fi. I love the genre. There's a lot of love notes to everything from Doctor Who to Star Trek in the books. So for other readers who are fans writ large of dystopia, sci-fi, and other worlds, you'll find a few little gems in there for you.
Cool. So I have to confess that I'm typically not a sci-fi reader, but what I think is so special about your books is that there's so much that's relatable to any reader because you're dealing with relationships and human connection, and then also a relationship to the things that are going on around us. And hearing that you wrote this 10 years ago, could you have imagined where we are right now and the way that just artificial intelligence, for example, or the way that technology is being weaponized has completely taken over, even if we're not necessarily conscious of that minute by minute?
Yeah, it's a little weird to write about dystopia and promote dystopia and then also start living through it, because not just on the tech side, but we were well into our pandemic reality when the third book came out. And I think that some of the stark relief into which our iniquities have been thrown also has a lot of echoes in the series. Because Nick, thank you. And you're right. It's, for me, anything I write is all about the people and the characters. It might have a different genre, flavor, world we're putting them into, but I'm most interested in what makes people act and how people interact with each other. But yeah, it's a lot of pressure. I will say I had to do a whole lot of rewriting of the third book as we approached publication, just because some of the things that I put in there as hypotheticals, we already had or has surpassed in the past 10 years in terms of AI and what we can do.
Crazy.
It is so wild. It is so wild. So one of the things I was wondering about, and I just need to just double check because I want to get the name right here, is Ray Kurzweil, who is in the book, and I was wondering as I'm reading, or in the first book, is how much was, and you talk about with this Time magazine article, was it about him? Was it about his kind of visions and thinking that was the seed for you?
He was more someone that I turned up when I was looking at who's working in futurism and in the sort of fields that would have been developing the tech. And he is a real guy. There are several characters and historical moments that are dropped in there that are real. But I can't say that I was a big, Kurzweil head. I don't even know what his fan girls and boys might call themselves, prior to starting my research. But then especially, it was at least on YouTube 10 years ago, you can actually watch that episode of the game show. I don't want to spoil anything for those who haven't read the book yet. But there's an episode of a game show he appears on, and I was able to watch it. And so the descriptors that I have in there are from me being mesmerized and watching this old clip on YouTube over and over. And that prescience, my books have nothing on some of the themes that were touched on there. And you think, wow, this is, the 1950s, and this guy is seeing what's going to happen in 50 years. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of chilling, in fact.
Yeah, well, I had the sense when I was reading that the books were so timely, right this very minute. And so to hear that they were written a decade ago or mapped out, first one finished, the other two mapped out, is just, it is actually kind of scary. Does it give you the chills a little bit?
A little bit. Although both, I say for two reasons. One, because, oh my gosh, did any of us manage to sort of get close to what was happening? That's a little, freaky. You should all probably be nervous around me. But also on a far more modest realization level, it's such a case of the more things change, the more they stay the same. During my parental leave for late night baby feedings, I have been doing marathons of The West Wing, which debuted more than 20 years ago. And every political issue that they touch on in the show, we have not fixed yet. Some of the things we talk about a little differently now, but it just continually made me go, oh, yep, haven't fixed that problem. That's still a thing.
So, it's pretty rare, I think, for someone to have 3 books come out and have a publisher commit to a trilogy like this from the get-go. Can you tell us a bit about what the process was for getting this story into publication, and then also how that's kind of related to your journey as a writer, and how folks might learn from that journey in order to kind of pursue their own interest in writing?
Yeah, for sure. It's a slog. I will take you through the story of this story as quickly as possible. But again, just anyone who's out there trying to get published, just know I see you, I hear you, keep going. It takes a lot of time. So the trajectory for this trilogy in particular, and Nick, you're right, sometimes it's really hard to pitch a trilogy, especially if you don't have it all written. I learned that along the way. And the good news is by the time it got picked up, it was all written because it took a while. But part of what hit a big pause button on it, I was actually very lucky. I thought early on, at the time, one of the big 5 publishing houses was still accepting unagented submissions specifically for dystopian and sci-fi works, one of their more successful imprints. So we'll not be throwing anyone under the bus here, but I will say that it was picked up by an acquisitions editor there who was going to get it into their publication pile and would put it on hold for a year, for 3 years in a row, where he'd say, I will let you know by October. I really think we can get into the mix this year. I'll send a contract your way. And what they did not allow was simultaneous submissions. So I'd had it out a bunch of places. And then this big 5 editor said, I'm going to acquire this. You just got to give me a little time. You can't send it anywhere else. So in those 3 years, I finished robust drafts of the second 2 books. So by the time after 3 years, he called me. The first time that he had called me on the phone. So I thought that it was the big moment of, I'm sending you a contract. This is your moment. And instead it was, Beth, I'm so sorry that after this long, I have to tell you that my boss says we just have too much dystopian in the pipeline. I don't want to sit on it for another year, so I'm releasing it. Wow. And then I was back to square one, sending it around to agents as well as to publishing houses. And it eventually did find its home with Owl House Books, which was a very new imprint of the Homebound Publications publishing company, which the larger parent company does more poetry and nonfiction. And this was a brand new venture for them. So we got to learn together, as Original Syn was one of the first in their Owl House catalog. And I learned a lot. And I also learned that especially while I was at MUW and still working and starting a family, that if I wanted to stay in the publishing business, I did want to land an agent. So that became my next big push. While all of these books were getting written, my next projects, I did not submit any directly to publishing houses. I just started on that agent quest until I found and landed the right one. And I'm happy to talk about that too. But that's the Original Syn story. It took about 7 years, 3 of which it was just held by a big publishing house, and then another 4 before it was in the world, another 1.5 years of submitting. And then it takes a year or 2 after you sign a contract for your first book to come out. You're working on revisions and layout and marketing. So it's a long, long trek from page to reader.
Yeah. And how, I mean, I've done writing, but from more the academic side. And so I haven't quite had to deal with the same publisher kind of things. And I don't have a monograph. So and I don't, right now, emotionally, I couldn't handle that. But what goes through an author's thinking when you're thinking about publisher and that collaboration? Because I think some people might default to like the big shiny object. And yes, there's perks with getting picked up by a big publisher. However, there might be other benefits to working with a smaller publisher that might be genre focused and really have cornered a niche, or they might just be able to give you better support on marketing, for example, as an author. Can you talk about kind of the thought process as a creator and trying to find the right fit with the publishers?
Yeah. I think that's a really astute question. And one thing that I will say factors in for a lot of writers, and certainly for me, is also about creative control. That's certainly one of the pros of going with a smaller publishing house, is that you as the writer will have a lot more creative control and also the opportunity to swiftly become a bigger fish in the smaller pond and know your editor, know the publisher, have them think of you when a marketing opportunity comes up, or there's a convention that they're going to that they might think of you first to let you know about, as opposed to if you're a debut author with a really huge publishing company, you might not be as top of mind, and you might have a more heavy-handed editor who's going to say, look, if we're going to sell this, we need to totally drop this storyline, totally cut this character. We need to go in a different direction, and you have to be willing to work with that. So for me, it varies project to project how precious I am about it. But I would say that that's sort of the number one thing, is how much creative control you're willing to relinquish and how much you want to be big fish in small pond versus start swimming in that ocean and see how you do. And if you can sort of swim upstream where there's a lot of other competition.
Cool.
Did you already have these done before you started the master's program, the MFA program at Mississippi University for Women? You were already done the 3 books.
Yeah, I was already done with these 3 books. I actually signed the contract my first year at MUW.
Right. Well, that's the mythology at MUW, is that Beth Kander had a 3-book contract by the time she left the program. So I'm just going to say, I thought that was on the dotted line when I signed it. I thought that was a deal.
That's going to be like in the admissions materials, man.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, so funny.
So what did I'm sorry, I just feel curious. I'm just curious, like, what did you do for your thesis then? I mean, this is kind of insider chat, but I'm just, you've done this huge project. Now you're going to do an MFA program. How do you switch focus, or what did you do?
Yeah, well, I was one of the reasons that I was so excited about MUW, and big shout out to MUW. Clearly, look at Kyla. Great people go to this school, and they're wonderful instructors who talk about that personal attention you're really going to get in a program. No one's paying me to say this. I had a really good W experience. But one of the appeals to me is a lot of MFA programs out there are MFA playwriting programs or MFA poetry programs. And this is an MFA in creative writing. And so Nick and I were chatting before we got started this evening about our shared undergraduate institution, Brandeis University, where you can often have dual majors and dual concentrations. So I was predisposed to like that. And I liked that MUW allowed me to focus on both fiction, my prose writing, and playwriting, which is my other longtime passion. So I promise this is an answer to your question, Kyla. My thesis project was twofold. I adapted the first real play that I ever wrote into a novel. And I wrote a paper sort of breaking down what that adaptation process was like and what pieces of the story functioned better in a novel, what pieces really functioned better on stage, and then sort of the larger conversation around generally, how do you know if when you write plays and books, how do you know where your story needs to live? So I was really excited to sort of get to pick apart for myself something that was going to continue to be relevant to me, because I'm always having new story ideas and then having to figure out, all right, is this for the stage or is this just for the page? So yeah, that was my thesis project, and it was a big endeavor. It was harder than I thought it would be to adapt my own work and feel like I was honoring the original piece, but putting enough in there to make a book out of something that was much more bare bones as a book outline than you'd think, because the blessing of playwriting is you get to have so many other artists take what you give them and make it into something beautiful on stage, right? I don't have to write out every detail of what the world looks like. I can say they walk into a vaguely steampunk environment, and then the designer figures out what that actually looks like. I don't have to say any more than that than I want to. And you have light and sound and directors and actors and all of these other artists who are going to render something a little bit different and incredible each time. So much more than what you gave them. These other artists are going to make your work. And the intimidation factor with a book is it's just you and the reader having an experience that you're not there for. So you really hope that you got it right on the page.
Very cool. So there's certainly the economy of scale that's different with the playwriting versus the book writing, especially in a trilogy kind of situation. But I'm curious to hear a bit more about like the approach to one versus the other. So my vague impressions of the playwriting side of things is that is it possible that you have more kind of parameters that might be in place before you even start a project, like based on a commission or based on a director-producer relationship where you're invited in to write? Or is it as equally open-ended in terms of the starting process for you and the way that you prefer doing playwriting?
Yeah, for me, it is much more here are the lines to color in for a play, in part because I came up through so much community theater and limited budget houses that I put on a lot of constraints. Usually I like to think of myself as a very producible playwright.
Okay.
So yeah, if I have a commission or something specific, working on one right now, and it's great because I know it has to take place in this town and address this topic. Within that, I still have so much room to play, but I have that base and I know that, okay, this is the world that I'm going to be living in. But even when it's an independent project, I'm always thinking, can this be done on stage? Can this be done at a cost that's not going to make it prohibitive for most theaters? I would love to someday be on Broadway. I don't really write for Broadway. I mean, I really write for regional theaters. I really write for equity houses that are in communities that people can afford the tickets to go and see the shows. So that too often helps me hone in. So it's very stripped down and about characters and theme more than about, you know, Miss Saigon style helicopter landing on the stage or anything like that. Whereas with a book, I can go anywhere that I want to go, which is incredible and intimidating.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of your plays that you have had and maybe that are upcoming?
Yeah. So the most recent play that I had fully produced before COVID shut down a bunch of performances this year was Hazardous Materials at Creed Repertory Theater in Creed, Colorado. And y'all, when the world reopens, go to Creed. There's actually a great documentary that I think is still maybe available on Vimeo called Rep that's about Creed Repertory Theater because it's one of the few still running rep companies around, which what a repertory theater means is that they have multiple shows running concurrently. And so you can go for a weekend when they have their season up and see 5 or 6 incredible shows featuring mostly the same actors, which is an incredible experience because you get to see people in such wildly different roles, literally back to back. There's something really exhilarating about rep that it isn't done everywhere. And they produced the world premiere of my show, Hazardous Materials, which was one that I was working on while I was at MEW. And the scenes alternate taking place in 1955 and 2015. And there was a beautiful push-out stage where the walls would come together and you would be in this hoarder's apartment in 2015 while the 2015 characters are trying to figure out who died there. And then the walls would come apart, the clutter would get pulled in and away backstage, and you would be in the sparse apartment in 1955 and meet the 2 women who had a love story there.
Wow.
And you get to solve along with the 2015 investigators who wound up there and why. And Creed did a beautiful job with it. I largely credit them and the director, who's a dear friend of mine, Kyle Hayden, who's based in Pittsburgh. It actually wound up winning the Henry Award for Best New Play or Musical in 2019-2020. And it was lined up for a few other productions. It does now have, it's gotten one with New Stage Theater in Jackson, did a presentation of it a couple months ago. And I don't know if it's publicly announced yet, but there is a theater in Chicago that is doing it this spring. So I love that play. And it's very much an example of how much smaller the worlds of my plays are than my books. It is 4 actors, 1 room that we just switched the era and all takes place for the 2015 actors in the space of an afternoon and for the 1955 actors over the space of a year, but always in the same room. So that's Hazardous Materials. It is available through Stage Rights, and they, sell it in their shop and on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and wherever if you want to read the play. And they represent several of my other works. I will say my most produced play to date is complete departure, not something that if you're familiar with Beth Kander work otherwise, you would assume it was by me. It's called Running Mates, and it's about a small town Georgia husband and wife who run against each other for mayor. It is goofy and silly and easily done. And so dinner theaters and regional theaters like it. So yeah, Running Mates or The Family Party. That was a real quick work on pulling that up there, Nick. You're
oh my God.
magician.
Nick's got it going. This is amazing. Okay, this is so fun. When did this come out? When did you do this one?
Running Mates, I think its first production was in 2011, 2012, and then it got picked up 2013, 2014, something like that.
So what was the first play that you had produced?
The first play that I was, fun way throwback story, and then we'll go to real grown-up life. The first play that I ever wrote and produced was when I was in high school. I was 14, and I wrote a play called Through Rachel's Eyes about a young woman's friendship with an elderly blind woman, and community theater in Flint, Michigan. Bravely did the show with the cast that ranged in age from, I think, 8 to 80. But the 80-year-old did not play the elderly blind woman. She was played by a 13-year-old because that's how
Amazing.
Community theater works. So that was my first sort of like giant leap. And I played one of the old bingo ladies. That's actually, fun fact, the only time I have appeared in one of my own plays was that one wearing a 80s style tracksuit. I really, fashioned myself a rose from the Golden Girls, and that was fun.
Awesome.
But otherwise, when I moved to Jackson, Mississippi, after I finished undergrad at Brandeis, which was a big culture shock, moving from Boston area to heart of the Bible Belt.
Whoa.
I needed to find my people quickly, so I became a founding member of Fondren Theater Workshop, which is a great theater company that exists to this day in Jackson, and worked on several plays with them, and with them developed my show Unshelved, which is about a family sort of unraveling through Alzheimer's and what the mother's unraveling does to the husband and son as well. And then that show actually went on to get produced in Chicago and a couple of other places. And it was sort of the one that taught me, I can do this. It also got some of the nastiest reviews I've ever gotten in my life, and taught me that I can survive that too, which is also something that anyone in the arts field needs to know.
Yeah.
All art is subjective. There are going to be some people who hate what you do, and the more out you are and your work is, the more you're going to get critique as well as praise. So it's not fun, but wow.
I just say I have something coming out on Thursday that we'll hear more about on Thursday, and I'm dying like 7,000 deaths as I wait for it to come out for exactly that reason. I'm like, cue the hate mail. So I really relate to that, but also just how good it is for you to realize that you can weather that. It's horrible that you experienced it, but also you can weather that. So I think that is a good, that is I guess there's a good lesson in there, right?
Right. Know what you need. Do you need a pint of ice cream? Do you need your best friend? Do you need to go for a run? People have different things that they need. But yeah, you can get through it, and you got to get through it, because you know what? Google bad reviews for your favorite author. Yeah. Everyone gets pooped on by someone.
It is very, very, very true. So if we were to switch back to Syn and Salvation momentarily, and one question from the audience from Miss Vivian, who is our nearest and dearest groupie here. Thank you, Miss Vivian, for tuning in. She lives in Oxon Hill, Maryland.
Thank you.
And she's been hanging out with us for the entire pandemic, and we really appreciate her.
Amazing.
So she's asking what the title means, and I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind covering both the trilogy title and then the latest book's title as well.
Yeah. So the first book and the series overall are called Original Syn, setting up these worlds of the originals, the people who rejected or could not afford merging with technology and extending their lives and joining this very elite club. They're the originals. And then the synthetic citizens, or Syns, are the other people. So it juxtaposes those two groups, original Syn for the first book, and that's the overarching title for the series. And then the second book is called Born in Syn, Syn, and it literally is the origin stories and sometimes the from birth stories of a lot of the major players in original Syn, because I'm always fascinated with backstories and how did we get there. And I think a lot of that comes from my own theater background, because actors are asked to do that even if it's not in the play. What's the backstory? Why would the person make this choice? So I loved getting to play with that title, Born in Syn, and get to dive in on why these characters are making these big dramatic choices. And then the third book, Syn and Salvation, I wanted something that was ambiguous, that was clearly, I had hit on a trend in the puns of the naming conventions for these books. But I wanted something that wouldn't necessarily tell you who gets saved in this book. Is it going to be the originals? Is it going to be the synthetic citizens? Because what I hope that I also do over the course of the series is tease out the idea that it's not all as absolute as we think, that it's not the originals are the good guys and they had things right in the old world, the world that we're living in right now, and not that these synthetic citizens are just the purely evil bad guys who were super selfish and have no humanity left in them. I wanted to complicate the relationships and the ideas a little bit more than that. So I will not tell you who ultimately finds salvation in the third book, but that's where the titles came from.
Cool. Thank you for that. Just one quick follow-up. With the third part of the trilogy, did you have certain things in mind for that part of the story that ultimately changed in a big way when it came time to writing that part of the story?
Yeah. First of all, when I first started writing original Syn, I didn't think it was going to be a trilogy. I thought very initially that it was going to be a short story that I was writing in response to reading this article about the singularity. And then I kept writing, was like, oh no, looks like it's a book. This is going to be, a novel length work. And then as I was, 2/3 of the way through writing the book, I was like, this isn't wrapping up here. I think this is a trilogy. So yeah, a whole lot changed as I was writing it, as mentioned earlier, in part because the world was changing so quickly over the course of the time that I was writing these books. But also there's a lot of pressure when you're writing a trilogy that has a lot of big ideas, big themes, but also a lot of characters that you're trying to give each one an arc and a conclusion. And that's really what happens in Syn and Salvation. I promise, even a few little tiny side characters that maybe were your favorite, but you thought were a throwaway character in book one, they're not. They're going to get their due in book three. But if you picture, like an old cop show where they have the wall with the string and, connecting people's photographs and clues and all of these things around. I had to do that for this book. I had my, original Syn wall of, does this character story go all the way through? What nugget did I drop in book one that I have to make sure I tie up in book three? Because God willing, I have the wonderful problem that someone becomes such a fan that they go, wait a minute. On page 14 of book one, you said this character would never eat a turkey sandwich. And on page 57 of book three, they are mowing down that turkey sandwich. I didn't want to have that moment. So I had a lot to keep track of, and a whole lot changed.
Cool.
Do you have another one? Okay, I've got one. Which is, so I was curious as I'm reading the first book, and it reminded me of one of my absolute favorite fantasy authors, Terry Pratchett. And one of the things that I absolutely love that Terry Pratchett did in his books was they're just such wry commentary on society. But he's placed them in this other world. And I mean, I think Guards is by Terry Pratchett. It's probably my favorite book that's ever been written. And I love it because of this, just searing social commentary. And so I'm wondering for you, is there something about the genre, like in your case, you've got young adult dystopian novels, but in the fantasy, this is there something about placing it in a different world that allows that kind of social commentary to come without the heavy hand?
Yes, what a wise question, Kyla. That you pulled off my mask. That is often what I'm doing. And Nick, sort of to your point earlier, you don't necessarily usually like sci-fi. I will say I grew up with a lot of it. I don't always love contemporary sci-fi. I don't spend a lot of my time reading it these days, but I do love Terry Pratchett. I do love Neil Gaiman. I do love Douglas Adams. I do love anyone who can drop you into this totally different world so that you then have the freedom to think or rethink these ideas in our real world. And yes, as someone who, has a lot of dear friends in the heart, the buckle of the Bible Belt, who also has a lot of friends who are so far left of center that I won't take it too far down the political spectrum, but I literally picture my most conservative and my most liberal friends when I'm writing and think, can I write a story and place it somehow that I could make a point that somehow lands for both of them, that I wouldn't be able to have any hope of achieving if I were just talking about an issue in our world right now.
Right.
Cool. Right. And I think that leads us all to a reminder about how problematic genre labels are. And it just made me think a bit about Thornton Wilder's The Skin of Our Teeth. And like, if someone doesn't know that, you're going to walk in because someone probably told you, oh, this is a really important play. It's part of the canon, Thornton Wilder. Oh my God, you got to go see it. And then, woo, it's not like.
What did I just see?
At all. Exactly. And, I think in our reading journeys, and certainly this has been the case for me, like when I have kind of put my preconceptions on pause about different storylines or cover artwork or genre labels, I've pretty much always been very surprised and my expectations have been exceeded, and I've suddenly gotten into a whole new area of writers. And at the end of the day, good storytelling is good storytelling, whether it's nonfiction, whether it's adult fiction, whether it's romance, whether it's sci-fi, whether it's YA, and even children's and middle grade and graphic novels now too. So there's something to be said for being humble enough to be open to kind of going outside of your comfort zone, and then also hear out the people who you care about. And when they've got a book recommendation, read it, and you might realize that there's a big taste difference, which is totally cool too. But you at least know that this book and this kind of story and this kind of author means a lot to that person in your life. So there's a lot of value in kind of going beyond the comfort zone on a lot of things. So I can't wait to use your books, Beth, as a motivation to get into more outside of my comfort zone for sure.
Thank you. I love that. Amen.
Yeah.
Here's to the great unlabeling of book genres.
So I have to. Oh
no, go ahead, go for it. Ooh, I got one of those too.
I was going to sidetrack and talk about labels for a second, which is totally off topic. So feel free to look awkward and then accidentally kick me off screen. Which is
well played. Well played.
That was amazing. So I live in Greenbelt. Everybody, hi, everybody from Greenbelt, Maryland. And a long time ago, I lived in Greenbelt before. And when I lived in Greenbelt before, the Greenbelt Library, which is I love to go, had the books, and it had mysteries. I love mysteries, and I'd go get my mysteries. And then one day, I walked in, and they had shuffled the deck. They had gotten rid of the genre category, and I remember saying to the librarian, I was like, where was my mysteries? I was twitching, I was in a panic. And I remember the lovely staff member said, well, this is a good way for you might get to know authors you wouldn't have seen, or sometimes authors have a book that's a mystery and then they have another book that's not a mystery. And so for me as a reader, though, I was challenged by that, because it was if I want a mystery, I wanted to be able to go get one. And so you folks are having me think about, you were having ripe old age, because that was many years ago, continuing to think about how there can be growth in just looking for a book that's good, even if Greenbelt Library should put the labels back.
Can I share a really funny Greenbelt Library thing? So this is neither here nor there, but I think it's at least worth a laugh. So stand by for a quick screen share here.
Oh yeah,
that's Greenbelt Library.
All right.
Getting on the Bernie meme. So anywho, we've got plenty more where that came from. Bernie's also made it to the Laurel Branch, in case anyone's interested.
I love puppies and kittens and Bernie's knit mittens.
And also, I do need to say Greenbelt Library is like the greatest library, you know. So if you're ever in Maryland, Beth, come see me and come see the Greenbelt Library.
I will. I would love to when the world opens.
Yeah.
I would love to.
Fun trivia fact for a future library trivia event is that the Greenbelt Library is actually the branch out of the 17 doing curbside service that has the highest circulation volume right now during COVID, and they are like on fire. Their appointments are booked. People come out with 50 books at a time. It's wild. Y'all are power users. We appreciate you. And you keep us on our toes with purchasing new books, which is great.
Amazing. Well, and to push them in the direction Kyla doesn't want them to be pushed, as we, ponder the great unlabeling. I think it was in Austin. I'm not 100% sure, but I went into a wine store once where, I'm used to seeing reds, whites, maybe by country, Argentinian wines. They did it wine by personality.
Ooh.
So it was like bubbly and relaxed, heavy and moody. And you could just, whatever mood you were hoping to get out of that glass, I found it like completely charming.
Look at me. Oxy, look at me. I'm like, I don't know. What if I'm bubbly and heavy? I don't know what to do.
That's great.
Oh my gosh.
So we have a serious question that we'll throw out, and then we'll keep kind of going back and forth, which is great. So this is a question from Alec.
Alec is my MUW bestie. So hi, Alec, MUW bestie.
Hi, Alec. And Alec is asking, does Ms. Kander have any suggestions for shopping, work, and forging relationships with agents and editors during COVID time?
Yes, I do. Good question, Alec. Hi, thank you for joining tonight. So a couple of things. One, reading is happening, like incredibly gangbusters. Reading is happening. So that's one of the good things right now, is while plenty of other things have been impacted and shut down and gone down during COVID, reading hasn't. So the publishing world is still functioning and robust. I have a book on submission right now and lots of other projects in the works, and just finished a project that will be coming out in early 2022, because the pace has not slowed in the publishing world. So it's a great time to be reaching out to agents, because you might have a little bit more bandwidth to do so, and they are still looking for projects as much as ever they were. That said, it's not easy. Do not be disheartened when it takes a little time, but here are a few things to try. If you are not on Twitter, and I say this as someone who's constantly trying to exit social media, I am not a big social media person, but Kyla, Nick, and I were discussing this earlier. Literary Twitter is a thing. Agents' social media of choice tends to be Twitter. And there are quarterly, I think now, opportunities called PitMad, where you use the hashtag PitMad, and it's for pitching agents like mad that day. And there are all sorts of other hashtags so that you can tag your genre, tag if it's for middle grade or YA or adult. And agents do spend a lot of time on Twitter on those days looking through PitMad pitches. There are a lot of resources out there now for how to write the perfect PitMad pitch. So that's one way, is you really can directly get in front of agents through Twitter. And I know several folks who acquired their agent through PitMad or Pitch Wars or something like that. We get to Pitch Wars in a moment. But the other thing, there's a great site, Manuscript Wishlist, MSWL. Don't just scattershot. I don't know. Don't be random in your approach to finding the right agent for you. It truly, truly helps to research the agent. So go to Manuscript Wishlist, search by the terms of the sort of book that you're writing, right? If you're writing a ghost story, search ghost story on the Manuscript Wishlist site and see what agents are looking to rep ghost stories, and don't submit to those who aren't. Really focus in, because the third piece of advice that I will give, since, I like to do, it's a trilogy, is the theme of the night, right? Is really hone your letter to agents. It should be about them and about your project, not about you. That's a mistake that a lot of early writers write, is you might have the most fascinating backstory of all. If you're not writing an autobiography, it doesn't really matter. You can use it later, maybe to connect with your agent. But when you're trying to get the work out there, you want to have a really strong letter that you tailor each time to the agent, that leads with, here's why I think you're the right agent for my project. Here's what my project is. And really, that is how you structure your pitch letter to agents.
And I'm guessing you shouldn't say, I saw your name on Duotrope.
I mean, I think it's better to shift on your research elsewhere. Yeah. Or also, I mean, there's people compare notes about agents as well. You will see when you get into literary Twitter, people who are not, for example, handling representation as in authentic representation of communities very well will get dragged on Twitter as much as any author. So yeah, also before you sign with someone, make sure that you've done your homework on them.
I just have a question about your, and you sort of touched on this, that you have a project coming out early next year. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've got going on and what we can look forward to seeing from you?
Yeah, so the project coming out next year, I can't say too much about yet. I will say that it is a middle grade book, so that's totally different for me, but it was a lot of fun to get to do. The projects that I'm working on right now, out on submission, is my ghost story, the one that got me into Pitch Wars 2 years ago. Happy to talk about Pitch Wars if folks are interested in that. It's called 13 Jericho Lane, and it takes Jewish ideas about ghosts and puts a modern feminist twist on that and has a little bit of a mystery. I love to let people be trying to figure things out, and there are some wordplay clues in there throughout the book. So that's actually the book that my current agent, who is amazing, picked me up on that book. That is the one that I submitted to her, and actually wound up having multiple agent offers on that book. And I say that not to toot my own horn, but to say it has now been out on sub for a few months and has not yet been picked up. Every part of it takes a long time. Don't get discouraged. And right now I am writing 2 different book projects. One is something I never thought I would write, but that I'm falling in love with daily, which is a verse novel. And it too, I'm sort of on a kick of reclaiming Jewish folklore and putting new and feminist twists on it. So it's a retelling of Lilith that goes all the way to New Orleans in the Katrina era, about how we demonize women, and don't want to say too much more, but that is one of my current projects. And then the other is set in civil rights era Mississippi, in Jackson. It's set in the year that the synagogue there was bombed, and it is a golem story. Wow. So right now there is sort of a brand. It's very different from original Syn, but I think that some of the big themes of, okay, so this big idea is it's dystopia or it's a golem story, but it's still about relationships. It's still about people, and ultimately, how do we get into these situations and how do we get out of them?
I just had a random thought that's probably too big to really address, but I wonder, is it like with the notion of dystopia and dystopian fiction and such, it feels like we collectively give something this label to try and show how it's so far removed from what real life is, but is some of that even just like a coping mechanism to like try and normalize what we're actually living? Because what we're actually living tends to be, if it's not in the moment, the actual dystopia, there's a lot of like connection in there. And that just, yes, this is my
dystopian hindsight is 2020.
Yeah. Oh, and 2021 apparently.
And 2021.
Hopefully we move past that so far. We'll see.
Look at us all smiling and joking about this pandemic that will be in all the history books that we're living through right now.
Oh, so sad. On a happier note, a question from our dear colleague Steve, who works miracles with all of our digital and programs and everything. We really appreciate everything that he does for us. And I believe that his baby Flora a couple years ago in his picture there. And Steve asked,
I see them in the corner. Hello.
Yeah. What's your favorite, or who is your favorite author, or do you have several favorite authors?
I have several. That's one of those, like, such a, hard, mean question. I will say I have an entire shelf to my left that is all Neil Gaiman books. I do love Neil Gaiman, and I love his career and trajectory as an author, that he does children's books and adult books and more serious and cheeky. So I love all of that. I've been on a big nonfiction kick as well. I love Jenny Lawson and folks who are able to really write contemporary humor in an accessible way. This is on my nightstand now as well, and it is the 3rd Barack Obama book I have read, and I also love Becoming, so I guess the Obamas writ large are some of my current favorite authors of a good example of living through history and then being able to translate it so quickly. It's like the opposite of dystopian writing, and I find that really entertaining. I love Mila Goldberg, Angie Thomas. I could really just keep listing authors that I love for a long time. I'm going to stop now, and then I'm going to kick myself as soon as I sign off for forgetting to list my other many favorite authors.
Very cool. Well, that's all fabulous. Thank you for sharing that. I finished Promised Land in December, and it was intense, and it's so different than Becoming. And I think after Becoming, everyone kind of had this feeling like, oh, it's going to be more of Becoming, and nope, we got heavy into climate policy and legislative maneuvers and things like that. And it is so President Obama that it's like, it's what we needed, even if we didn't realize that that's what we were going to get.
It's the Batman of books. It's what we needed. It's not necessarily what we wanted.
Kyla, do you have another question?
Well, I was just going to say, if anybody out there listening to us, we've got a couple minutes. So if you'd like to hastily, as fast as you can, type any questions that you have into the chat, we will try and ask them to Beth while we have her for a couple more minutes. And I think really, I'm just so curious about, and I think we're probably our time may have escaped us. So let me just say before I get to my question that we need to have you back.
Anytime. This has been delightful.
When the next thing comes, let's keep in touch and let's continue this conversation for sure. I think I'm just so curious about the process. I mean, really, I look at the trilogy and the vision and the staying power as somebody who, I'm good for, I can knock out 1,200 words like nobody's business, and so to have the staying power to stay with a project, I'm curious about how. Oh, actually, we have a question. I can interrupt myself, but we have a question. But I will say, if you can talk a little bit about the focus, like how did you stay with that project for that long?
Yeah, so folks will tell you that there's two kinds of writers, right? Plotters and pantsers. People who map out everything and people who fly by the seat of their pants. That's where plotter and pantser comes from. And I identify as a plantser as we continue the great unlabeling, because I believe in being flexible throughout the process, and you need to a little bit fly by the seat of your pants if you don't want to squash creativity, at least for me. But I do outline, even if I change it 36 times, that's part of how I'm able to stay through a project. I need to know where I'm driving the bus so that I can keep filling the tank and get it there to make the world's most banal metaphor about writing.
No, that's a good metaphor though. That works.
But so, yeah, I usually start with an ending in mind. And so it might change, but if I have my beginning and my ending, then the work of writing really is the middle to figure out how to make it interesting and complicated to get there so that you arrive at that ending that should, as ever, be both surprising and inevitable. That's always, the goal of your good ending. But that's how I stick with it, is I know, okay, well, I have to get to this ending. I set it up for myself. I got to get there. The other answer, in all honesty, is that I'm never writing just one thing at once. I don't believe in writer's block writ large across the board. You can't write a word, anything. But I do believe that you can hit a wall in a project and need to step away from it for a little bit. So when I hit a wall in my book, I hop over to my play, or I hop over to the verse novel. And that's how I'm also never done, because I finish one and it's not like, what am I going to do next? It's okay. Well, I'm 2/3 of the way through this one and 1/3 of the way through this one. And then I'll start picking away at something else. And again, that's not necessarily advice. I don't know if that's how everyone likes to work, but that's how I'm able to stick it out for the long haul.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Cool. So, we have one audience question here that will be the last audience one for the night. And then I've got one more just for kicks because I can, if you have a moment.
Yes, the power.
The question here is, can you talk about pitch wars? Any tips?
Yeah, so Pitch Wars, for anyone who's not familiar, it is the same folks who run Pit Mad, but it is a different program. Pit Mad is like a one-off Twitter day, several times a year. Anyone can participate. You don't have to apply. Pitch Wars is a program that you apply to, and there is a 2-day window, usually in September each year. So, Brandy, to your question, tip number 1 is start preparing now if you want to apply for Pitch Wars in September. And the first thing to do is make sure that you have a finished manuscript that is ready to get ripped apart and put back together again, but is not in first draft super fresh form. They really want you to be ready to get it ready for agent presentation. Because how Pitch Wars works, if you are selected, and it is very selective at this point, they have thousands of people apply for approximately 100 spots each year. You are partnered with an agented author and work really intensely with them, revising your book over the course of 3 to 4 months in preparation for the agent showcase, where 100 or more now agents sign up to attend the Pitch Wars showcase, which is a virtual showcase, and you get to pitch your book with just sort of a 1-sentence pitch and maybe the opening paragraph and a little bit of description, like 200 words total, something like that. And then they can comment on whether or not they'd like to see more of your work. So Pitch Wars tips, be working on the manuscript now. Before the window opens in September, there are several other steps along the way. You can actually go to Pitch Wars website at any time and see the calendar for the year ahead. But when they announce the mentors and the mentors post their wish lists, which are very much like manuscript wish lists, read those and only apply to mentors who are looking for what you're writing. It can be easy to go for the flashy mentors. You're like, oh, I've read their books, I've heard of them. But if your books aren't like theirs, or if they're looking for someone who has a really specific goal in mind and that's not your goal, that's not the one to apply for. Make sure that the mentor, because they put what they're looking for in a mentee, that you align with that. And then the same way that you would approach, an agent, make sure that it's a tailored letter to that mentor with your best foot forward with your work. And good luck. And if you get in, it is a very intense program that will own your evenings and weekends for the duration that you are in it. Apologize to any partners or children because you will have a lot of deadlines to hit, but it's a really good experience.
Awesome. So just before we wrap, I would love to hear your thoughts about the importance of writing in any career path. We spent a lot of time talking about writing and the business of it if you're going to do that professionally. But I think there's so much that I've come to see in my own career where the skills that I got as a writer in college, especially after that freshman seminar where my butt got kicked, and then in grad school where it got elevated even more, like I would not have been able to do anything professionally without that level of training. And even then I was not a writing major at all. But can you just kind of speak to generally the importance of writing in life skills and advancement?
Yeah, I can't overemphasize how important and transcendent writing is. And I've actually gone in and done writing workshops for a lot of organizations and companies where the students are not writers, but whoever brought me in understands that the basics of storytelling are foundational to so much of what we do. We are all storytellers. We have different ways that we tell our story, whether it's over dinner, whether it's short stories, poems, prose, whether it's making the case for a client because we're a lawyer. Being able to get down on paper our thoughts helps us in any other field that we're pursuing. And I think that when we frame it less so in terms of writing, which can be intimidating to people, but really strip it down to storytelling, everyone wants to hear a good story. Everyone wants to be able to tell a good story. And by cultivating our writing skills, what we're really doing is giving ourselves permission and practice at being storytellers.
Awesome. Beautifully put. Thank you. I appreciate it. We sometimes have to kind of make sure that we're kind of highlighting the importance of this as it applies beyond just the folks who are into our literary events. And the library has some really amazing programs, live virtual tutoring in English and Spanish. So if anyone's tuning in, if you've got kids at home or if you know kids in your communities and they might need a little extra support, it is available for free through the library with an expert who is solely going to dedicate their time to that individual. And we know our schools are really offering some great virtual content as well. So keep connecting with us all. And if you have any questions on resources, definitely let us know. So Kyla, would you mind plugging how folks can get Beth's books before
Yes.
I do your closing?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of different ways you can get Beth's books. So one of the ways is you can get them from our friends, PGC MLS, these guys right here. They can get you if you don't have a card, you can sign up. And they also can get you a virtual library card. So reach out to our friend Nick and PGC MLS and get yourself a library card and Beth's books. You can also get them from your favorite independent bookstore or our favorite independent bookstore, Loyalty Books, which is the library's partner bookstore, and they have branches in Silver Spring, Maryland, and also in DC. So please check them out, and they're really, really great. And also, Nick put in the chat, you'll see where you can get some information about the play. Which play did you put? I'm just checking. I want to make sure I get this right.
Hazardous Materials.
There you go, Hazardous Materials. So that's also in the chat, where you can get a copy of Best Play.
Yeah. And just before we say sadly goodbye and goodnight, we want to draw your attention to a few of our upcoming author events. We have a blockbuster lineup continuing into February. The days and weeks and months are flying by somehow. But we've got a great series coming up. We're going to have our announcement for Black History Month coming up later this week, so stay tuned for that. But just to touch on some of the authors, on Tuesday, February 9th, we'll be back with the Human Relations Commission. We are hosting Jamar Tisby, who will be interviewed by Dr. Kumar Huda of Georgetown University, and his book is called How to Fight Racism, which is going to be a really powerful talk. On Wednesday, February 10th, we are switching gears and we're looking at the quite remarkable role of STDs in shaping contemporary society and science. And there's actually a lot of crossover between some of the topics that we've been talking about in terms of systemic inequalities and things like that with that public health conversation. So I encourage you to check out that. That is going to be with Dr. Ina Park, who has a new book coming out called Strange Bedfellows. And we're co-presenting that with our county's HIV awareness program, which is really important. And then on Wednesday, February 17th, we are presenting Anna Malika Tubbs, whose new book, The Three Mothers, looks at the mothers of some of our civil rights heroes like Martin Luther King Jr. and their important role in putting the movement into action. And of course, we all know mothers are super amazing. And Kyla is a mother, Beth is a mother, I have a mother, and she's amazing. It kicks me in the pants all the time. And they, of course, really special people. She's going to be in conversation with Jamise Harper, who is the Spines and Vines bookstagrammer, who also lives here in the county, is an amazing champion of the library. And because that is not enough, we continue on the following week. On Tuesday the 23rd, we'll return with our Elephant We Don't See Diversity Dialogue series with Kyla and Michelle, talking about Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, which is also a series on streaming now. And then on Wednesday, February 24th, we will have a talk by Will Robin, who is a music professor at University of Maryland, and he's looking at the music industry and the role of the Bang on a Can Ensemble, which is a really famous contemporary music ensemble based at Mass MoCA, and they're going to be talking about music business stuff, which is really cool, with Jeremy Ney of the Phillips Collection. So tons to come. All those books are going to be available through the library. Please, please, please support Beth. Check out her books from the library. You can purchase her books. They're a great gift. The cover art is spectacular, and it's got a theme, if you couldn't tell. So really encourage you to check that out. And Beth, we're so grateful for your time. This has been really a delight, and thank you for rolling with our eccentricities tonight. It was just the right vibe that we needed, given everything.
Anytime. Total pleasure. Y'all have me back sometime. I'll be happy to hang out with you again.
Very good.
Love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyla. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.